The massive holographic display in the Coalition Command Center painted a picture of absolute terror. Red zones spread across the galaxy map like a deadly infection, each one representing another world consumed by the Vorthak Empire. Admiralty. Kira's crystalline hands trembled as she watched the Helix sector's final beacon flicker and die. 17 systems in 3 weeks, whispered Commander Vex, his aquatic features pale with fear. At this rate, we have maybe a month before they reach the core worlds. The Coalition's greatest minds had thrown everything at the Vorthak swarms. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids bounced harmlessly off their adaptive hulls. Quantum disruptors that could tear apart molecular bonds simply made the creatures stronger. Each weapon the Coalition deployed was studied, analyzed and countered within hours. Admiral, called out the tactical officer, his crystalline form flickering like a dying star. We've lost contact with the Helix sector. The Vorthak have broken through Admiral Thorne's fleet. All 37 ships and gone. Kira closed her compound eyes, each one reflecting the death of another billion souls. The Astrani had lived for thousands of years in peaceful contemplation, their crystal cities floating serenely among the stars. War was an abstract concept to them, something solved through diplomacy and advanced technology. But the Vorthak didn't negotiate. They consumed. The biomechanical creatures moved like a plague across space, their ships growing larger with each victory as they incorporated the remains of defeated fleets into their own hulls. They learned from every battle, adapted to every strategy, evolved past every defense. The Coalition's sophisticated warfare had become predictable, almost mathematical in its precision. "What about the hegemony's new graviton weapons?" asked Commander Zek of the reptilian saurid race. "Or the collective's temporal displacement fields?" "Already tested and countered," Kira replied bitterly. The Vorthak encountered similar technologies in the outer spiral. They adapted within the first engagement. In the depths of the Coalition's archives, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic pride, lay a single file marked with the insignia of a small blue world on the galaxy's rim. Earth. Humanity. A species so primitive they still used chemical propulsion for some of their spacecraft. Their weapons were kinetic, their strategies crude, their technology laughably simple by galactic standards. The Council of Species had debated for hours. Some called it desperation, others called it insanity. But as the Vorthak swarms consumed the Altair system and began their advance toward the Coalition's core worlds, even the proudest civilizations began to whisper about the humans. Stories filtered in from the frontier territories, tales of human mercenaries who fought with brutal efficiency, reports of colonial disputes settled not through diplomatic channels, but with explosives and projectile weapons. The galactic community had dismissed these accounts as exaggerations, primitive beings clinging to outdated methods of conflict resolution. Now, those same primitive methods seemed like humanity's only hope. The human vessel appeared on their sensors, without fanfare, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the battle zone. The ship looked ancient compared to the Coalition's sleek vessels, its hull scarred by countless battles and patched with metal from a dozen different worlds. No elegant curves or shimmering energy fields, just angular armor plating and weapon, ports that looked disturbingly functional. Inside the cramped bridge, Captain Minho studied the tactical data streaming from the Coalition fleet. His weathered face bore the marks of campaigns fought in places the galaxy had forgotten, against enemies that existed only in classified reports. Around him, 49 other veterans prepared their equipment with the methodical precision of soldiers who had learned that survival depended on details. Sergeant Dongwu, a mountain of a man whose arms were covered in scars from close-quarters combat, hefted a magnetic breaching charge. "Looks like they've got themselves a real problem." "Out there, Captain." "Adaptive biomechanical creatures," mused Lieutenant Jinna, her small frame hiding reflexes honed by years of asymmetric warfare. "Evolve to counter energy weapons, overwhelm through superior numbers, coordinate through hive mind intelligence." She looked up from her datapad. "Reminds me of the crawler wars on Kepler 442. Private so young, barely old enough to have fought in 3 separate colonial conflicts, checked her kinetic rifle with practiced ease. Sir, their adaptation seems focused on energy-based attacks. What about good old-fashioned kinetic force? Minho's smile was cold as winter on a dead world. These aliens had never experienced human warfare. They had never faced soldiers who treated impossible odds as a professional challenge. They had never encountered a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of breaking things. That didn't want to be broken. Time to introduce them to some very old concepts, Minho said quietly. Let's show them what happens when the galaxy's most primitive species decides to solve a problem. The docking clamps engaged with a soft metallic click that echoed through the Coalition flagship's pristine corridors. Admiral Kira had expected the human arrival to be loud, dramatic, filled with the kind of bravado that most warrior species displayed when boarding an alien vessel. Instead, the airlock cycled open with barely a sound, and 50 humans stepped through like ghosts materializing from the void. They moved with an efficiency that made Kira's crystalline skin ripple with unease. No wasted motions, no casual conversation, no gawking at the advanced technology surrounding them. Each human carried equipment that looked primitive by galactic standards, yet they handled it with the familiarity of tools that had never failed them when it mattered most. Captain Minho stepped forward, his boots making soft contact with the polished deck plating. He was shorter than most Coalition species expected from the stories, but something in his dark eyes made even the towering, sordid commanders unconsciously step back. Behind him, Lieutenant Jin Ah surveyed the bridge with the calculating gaze of someone who instinctively catalogued exits, cover positions, and potential weapons. Captain Minho, Admiral Kira began, her voice carrying the formal tones of diplomatic protocol. The Coalition welcomes your assistance in our time of greatest need. Our finest tacticians have prepared detailed briefings on Vorthak capabilities, and our engineers are ready to upgrade your equipment with our most advanced schematics, Minho interrupted quietly. Interior layouts of their ships, structural weak points, power distribution networks. The alien commanders exchanged glances. Commander Vex's amphibious features twitched with confusion. Captain, perhaps you don't understand the severity of our situation. These creatures have adapted to counter every weapon in our arsenal. Our plasma cannons, which can vaporize solid titanium, bounce off their hulls like raindrops. Our quantum disruptors, capable of unraveling atomic bonds, only seem to make them stronger. Jinnah moved to the tactical display, her compact frame dwarfed by the towering holographic projections of Vorthak bioships. She studied the images with an intensity that made the nearby officers uncomfortable. These weren't the crude diagrams they expected humans to request. These were detailed scans showing internal corridors, organic computer networks, and the pulsing biomechanical hearts that powered the enemy vessels. Adapt to what specifically? Jinnah asked, her voice carrying the professional detachment of someone who had spent years studying how to kill things efficiently. Energy frequencies, particle beam harmonics, quantum field fluctuations. The Astrani tactical officer's crystalline form shimmered as he accessed the combat records. All of the above. They seemed to analyze incoming attacks at the molecular level, then restructure their hull composition to neutralize the threat. After 3 engagements with our plasma weapons, their armor became completely immune. Our disruptors now actually strengthen their molecular bonds. Interesting, Jinnah murmured, zooming in on the bioship's internal structure. What about kinetic energy transfer? Simple mass times velocity equations? Steel moving at high speed? Commander Zek of the Sordid Navy actually laughed, a sound like grinding stone that echoed through the bridge. Captain, surely you jest. These creatures have survived the concentrated firepower of 17 star systems. The idea that primitive kinetic weapons could succeed where our most advanced technology has failed. Sergeant Dongwu stepped forward, and the conversation died. The human was massive even by galactic standards, his shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. Scars covered his exposed arms like a roadmap of violence, each one telling the story of close-quarters combat that most Coalition species had never experienced. In his hands, he held what appeared to be a simple magnetic charge, no bigger than a dinner plate. This little device, Dongwu said in a voice like grinding metal, contains enough explosive force to punch through 3 meters of hardened battle steel. No energy signatures to adapt to, no quantum fields to analyze, just chemistry and physics doing what they've done for billions of years. He smiled, and several alien officers took unconscious steps backward. Sometimes the old ways work best. Private So-Young, who looked young enough to be someone's daughter but carried herself with the fluid grace of a predator, examined the enemy ship displays. "Sir, look at their internal structure. Those biomechanical corridors are designed for energy weapon defense, ablative plating, dispersal networks, adaptive shielding, but the support struts, the organic computer cores, the power conduits." She pointed to vulnerable areas that no coalition tactician had considered important. "They're built for sophistication, not for someone walking up and hitting them with a hammer." The aliens stared at the humans as if they were speaking an extinct language. For millennia, galactic warfare had evolved toward increasingly complex energy manipulation, quantum field dynamics, and technological supremacy. The idea of solving problems through direct application of force seemed not just primitive, but incomprehensible. "Mind if we take a closer look at your problem?" Dongwu asked, hefting the magnetic charge like it weighed nothing. Around him, 49 other humans checked equipment that had been forged in the furnaces of countless forgotten wars. Admiral Kira realized, with growing amazement, that these beings weren't asking for better weapons or advanced technology. They were asking for permission to board enemy vessels and solve the galaxy's greatest threat with tools their ancestors might have recognized. The Vorthak Armada filled the star system like a plague of metal and flesh. Thousands of biomechanical ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls rippling with adaptive armor that had already analyzed and countered every weapon the Coalition possessed. Each vessel was a masterpiece of evolutionary warfare, grown rather than built, shaped by countless battles into the perfect killing machine. Admiral Kira watched from the Coalition flagship as the enemy fleet advanced with inevitable precision. The Vorthak had learned to counter plasma fire by developing energy-absorbing skin. They had neutralized quantum weapons by restructuring their molecular bonds. Every sophisticated attack the galaxy could devise had only made them stronger. "All ships, prepare for final engagement," she broadcast across the Coalition fleet. Her voice carried the weight of 17 fallen worlds, billions of dead, and the knowledge that this would likely be the galaxy's last stand. Then Minho's voice cut through the tactical chatter, calm as ice water. "Boarding teams, listen up. This is how we've settled disputes for 10,000 years. Time to get personal. The human transport ships were laughably primitive compared to the sleek Coalition vessels around them. No energy shields, no quantum. Drives just armored hulls scarred by 100 battles and loaded with equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum. But as the Vorthak swarm closed to engagement range, these crude vessels did something no one expected. They accelerated, directly toward the enemy. "What are they doing?" Commander Vex gasped, his aquatic features pale with disbelief. "They're flying straight into the Vorthak formation. 50 boarding pods launched from the human ships like bullets fired from ancient rifles. Each pod was nothing more than a reinforced cylinder with magnetic clamps, cutting torches, and enough life support to keep a team of soldiers alive for 30 minutes. By galactic standards, they were suicide capsules. By human standards, they were just another day at the office. The Vorthak bioships registered the incoming pods and immediately began adaptive countermeasures. Their hulls shifted composition to resist energy weapons, their defensive systems prepared to neutralize quantum attacks. Their organic computers calculated trajectories and prepared sophisticated interception protocols. They were completely unprepared for chunks of metal that simply wanted to stick to their hulls and explode. Sergeant, Dongwu's pod slammed into the side of a Vorthak command vessel, with enough force to crack the adaptive armor plating. The magnetic clamps engaged with metallic chunks that echoed through both ships, and within seconds, cutting torches began burning through biomechanical hull material that had never encountered anything so brutally direct. Breach in 30 seconds. Dongwu reported over the comm, his voice steady as granite. Behind him, his team prepared equipment that would have made a Coalition engineer weep with embarrassment. Shotguns loaded with steel pellets, assault rifles firing simple kinetic rounds. Explosive charges that worked on principles unchanged since humanity's first wars. The hull gave way with a sound like tearing flesh, and the humans poured through the breach like water through a broken dam. The Vorthak creatures inside were magnificent. Specimens of evolutionary warfare. Each one stood 3 meters tall, their biomechanical bodies perfectly adapted to counter energy weapons. Plasma-resistant skin, quantum field generators, adaptive armor that could neutralize particle beams within seconds of contact. Corporal Hai Jin's shotgun blast caught the first creature center mass, and physics did what 10 billion years of evolution couldn't prevent. Steel pellets traveling at supersonic speed punched through adaptive armor like it was made of paper, reducing sophisticated biomechanical systems to their component parts in a spray of organic debris. The creature's dying screeches activated emergency protocols throughout the ship. More Vorthak warriors rushed toward the breach, their bodies already adapting to counter whatever energy weapons the intruders might possess. They had evolved perfect defenses against sophisticated attacks, their organic computers calculating countermeasures faster than most species could think. Private So Young met them in a corridor junction with an assault rifle loaded with armor-piercing rounds. The bullets were simple things. Engineered steel moving fast enough to punch through tank armor. No energy signatures to adapt to, no quantum fields to analyze, just mass and velocity doing what they had done since the first human picked up a rock and threw it at something that annoyed them. The Vorthak fell like wheat before a harvester, their perfect evolutionary adaptations useless against weapons their creators had never imagined facing. "Command ship neutralized," Minho's voice crackled over the tactical net. His team had fought their way to the bioship's organic computer core, a pulsing mass of neural tissue that controlled the vessel's every function. The Vorthak had protected it against energy attacks, quantum interference, and viral intrusion. They had never considered protecting it against a satchel charge detonated at point-blank range. The explosion rippled through the ship's nervous system like a stroke, shutting down life support, navigation, and weapons in a cascade of organic failure. On the Coalition flagship's tactical display, one of the massive Vorthak bioships simply went dark. Then another, then 5 more in rapid succession. Lieutenant Jin A's team had discovered that Vorthak coordination networks relied on biomechanical relay nodes scattered throughout each ship. The aliens had armored these critical systems against every form of sophisticated attack the galaxy could devise. But a simple grenade tossed into a ventilation shaft bypassed every defensive measure they had evolved. The seemingly unstoppable Vorthak swarm began to stagger as their coordination networks collapsed under assault from weapons so primitive that their organic computers couldn't even classify the threat properly. For the first time in their species' history, the masters of adaptive warfare found themselves facing something they couldn't adapt to fast enough. Simple, direct, brutal human ingenuity. Panic spread through the Vorthak fleet, like wildfire through dry grass. For the first time in their 1,000-year conquest, the biomechanical masters of adaptive warfare faced something they couldn't understand, couldn't predict, and couldn't counter fast enough. Their perfect evolutionary algorithms, designed to analyze and neutralize any threat within minutes, found themselves stumbling against weapons so primitive they might as well have been wielded by cave dwellers. Sergeant Major Kyung Ho moved through, the Vorthak flagship like death itself, his boots making soft contact with the organic deck plating that pulsed like a living heartbeat. The bioship's corridors were works of art, grown rather than built, with walls that shifted color to indicate the vessel's mood and ceiling networks that carried information faster than light itself. The Vorthak had created ships that were living, creatures, breathing entities that could heal damage and adapt to any threat. They had never planned for someone to walk through those corridors and systematically blow up everything important. Nerve cluster identified 40 meters ahead, Kyung-ho reported over the tactical net, his voice carrying the professional calm of someone who had done this kind of work on dozens of worlds. Behind him, his demolition team prepared charges, with the methodical precision of craftsmen. These weren't sophisticated quantum explosives or energy-based weapons. They were simple chemical compounds that had been turning solid objects into scattered debris since humans first learned to mix sulfur and charcoal. The Vorthak bioship's immune system detected the intruders and began flooding the corridors with adaptive antibodies, microscopic machines designed to neutralize any foreign threat. The antibodies had evolved to counter energy weapons, chemical agents, and biological warfare. They swarmed toward the humans like angry insects, ready to dismantle the primitive invaders at the molecular level. Then they encountered Kyung-ho's flamethrower, and simple chemistry reminded them that some problems couldn't be solved through evolution. "Target their nerve centers," Jinna's voice echoed over the tactical net from another part of the ship. She had found the bio-vessel's primary neural network, a beautiful lattice of organic computing power that made coalition quantum processors look like toys. These things think like a hive mind. Cut the head, body dies. The network was protected by layers of adaptive shielding that could deflect particle beams, absorb energy attacks, and neutralize quantum interference. It was a masterpiece of defensive evolution, capable of withstanding anything the galaxy's most advanced civilizations could throw at it. Jinna solved the problem by crawling through a maintenance duct and placing a shaped charge directly against the neural cluster's main processing node. Meanwhile, in the depths of another Vorthak bioship, Private So Young found herself in a situation that would have been impossible to explain to a coalition tactician. She stood in a circular chamber, facing a Vorthak bioform that represented the pinnacle of their species' evolutionary achievement. The creature was 3 meters of pure adaptive warfare, its body continuously shifting to counter whatever attack it expected to face. Plasma-resistant skin rippled across its surface. Quantum field generators hummed to life around its limbs. Energy-absorbing nodes sprouted from its torso like metallic flowers. The bioform had adapted to survive direct hits from stellar-class weapons, and its organic computers were already calculating countermeasures for whatever sophisticated attack this primitive mammal might attempt. So Young pulled out a combat knife and charged. The Vorthak creature had never encountered anything so direct, so utterly without technological sophistication. Its adaptive systems, designed to counter energy weapons and quantum attacks, had no protocol for dealing with sharpened steel wielded by someone who had learned close-quarters combat in the colonial wars of a dozen forgotten worlds. The blade found the gap between armored plates that had never been designed to stop kinetic attacks. The creature died confused, its perfect evolutionary adaptations useless against a weapon that humanity's ancestors would have recognized. Across the Vorthak fleet, similar scenes played out with terrifying efficiency. Humans moved through biomechanical corridors like ghosts from a primitive past, their simple weapons carving through defenses that had withstood the galaxy's most advanced military forces. Each Vorthak ship was a masterpiece of adaptive evolution, but evolution took time, and the humans weren't giving them any. Admiral Kira watched from the Coalition flagship as her tactical display underwent a transformation that would have seemed impossible hours earlier. Red zones indicating Vorthak-controlled space began flickering to yellow as bioships went dark across the enemy formation. Warning signals cascaded through the alien fleet as coordination networks collapsed and command vessels fell silent. "Impossible," whispered Commander Vex, his aquatic features pale with disbelief. 17 star systems fell to these creatures. How are 50 humans doing what our entire military couldn't accomplish? The answer came from the most unlikely source. Deep in the bowels of a Vorthak bioship, Corporal He Jin had discovered something that made her laugh out loud. The creature's adaptive systems were so sophisticated, so perfectly evolved to counter advanced technology, that they had become vulnerable to the very simplicity they had evolved beyond. "It's like using a quantum computer to solve basic arithmetic," she reported over the comm. "These things are so advanced, they can't handle simple problems anymore." Captain Minho's voice cut through the tactical chatter, calm as winter morning. "Sometimes the best technology is knowing where to put the knife." The Vorthak fleet, masters of 1,000 conquered worlds, began their retreat. Not from superior firepower or advanced tactics, but from something far more terrifying. The realization that somewhere in the galaxy, there still existed beings primitive enough to solve problems by walking up and hitting them with rocks. The silence that followed the Vorthak retreat was deafening. For the first time in 3 weeks, the Coalition's tactical displays showed empty space where the biomechanical swarms had been. The terror of 17 star systems, the unstoppable force that had consumed worlds like a cosmic plague, had simply vanished into the void between stars. Admiral Kira floated in her command chamber, her crystalline form still trembling from what she had witnessed. Around her, officers from a dozen different species stared at their instruments in disbelief. The readings were clear, but the implications were staggering. 50 humans with primitive weapons had accomplished what the galaxy's greatest military minds had declared impossible. "Admiral," called Commander Vex, his voice barely above a whisper, "we're receiving surrender transmissions from the remaining Vorthak vessels. They're requesting safe passage back to their home territories." The words hung in the air, like a physical presence. The Vorthak Empire, which had never retreated, never negotiated, never shown mercy to any species it encountered, was asking for permission to flee. Throughout the Coalition fleet, repair crews worked to salvage what they could from the battle's aftermath. But it wasn't their own ships they were studying with fascination. It was the Vorthak biovessels, floating dead in space like the corpses of ancient sea monsters. Each one told the same story of systematic destruction from within, their sophisticated defenses bypassed by weapons so simple they seemed almost insulting. "Look at this," breathed Dr. Nex, the Coalition's chief bioengineer, as his team examined a Vorthak command ship. "The neural networks are intact. The adaptive systems are fully functional. The quantum defenses are still operational. But everything that actually makes the ship work has been blown up." The human boarding teams had ignored every piece of advanced technology aboard the enemy vessels. They hadn't tried to hack the quantum computers or disable the energy systems. They had simply found the pieces that looked important and destroyed them with explosives that any first-year engineering student could have built. Word of the impossible victory spread through hyperspace communication networks faster than light itself. In the crystal cities of the Astrani, philosophers who had spent centuries contemplating the nature of warfare found their theories shattered by the reality of human directness. In the deep ocean worlds of the Aquari, military strategists studied combat footage that showed humans winning battles by ignoring every tactical principle they held sacred. On Saurid Prime, the Reptilian Military Council convened emergency sessions to discuss what they were calling the human problem. How did a species plan for an enemy that didn't follow any recognizable pattern of warfare? How did sophisticated defense systems counter attacks that weren't sophisticated enough to be detected? Admiral Kira found herself walking through the Coalition flagship's corridors, her steps echoing off walls that had witnessed the galaxy's greatest military defeat turned into its most unlikely victory. She was searching for Captain Minho, though she wasn't entirely sure what she wanted to say to him. She found him in the docking bay, supervising his team as they loaded their equipment back onto their unremarkable transport ship. The humans moved with the same quiet efficiency they had shown throughout the battle, packing weapons that looked ancient by galactic standards, but had just changed the course of interstellar history. "Captain," Kira called out, her crystalline voice carrying across the cavernous space. Minho looked up from a crate of explosives that had probably cost less to manufacture than a single Coalition plasma rifle. His weathered face showed no trace of triumph or pride, just the calm satisfaction of someone who had completed a difficult job. "Admiral," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "your people did good work out there. Kept the Vorthak busy while we handled the details." The casual dismissal of what the Coalition considered the most significant military engagement in galactic history made Kira's compound eyes flutter with something between amusement and awe. "Will we see you again?" she asked, though she realized as the words left her that she wasn't sure if the question came from hope or fear. Minho paused at the edge of his ship's loading ramp, his scarred hands resting on equipment that had just redefined what the galaxy understood about warfare. "The galaxy's a big place, Admiral. Lots of problems that need simple solutions." He smiled, and for a moment Kira understood exactly why the Vorthak had fled in terror. It wasn't cruelty or bloodthirst in that expression. It was something far more unsettling, the absolute certainty that no problem was too complex to be solved with the right application of force. But don't worry. When you really need us, we'll be there. The human vessel departed without ceremony, disappearing into hyperspace with the same lack of fanfare that had marked their arrival. But they left behind something that would reshape galactic civilization, the knowledge that somewhere in the universe there still existed beings primitive enough to win wars by walking up to their enemies and hitting them with sticks. In taverns, across 1,000 worlds, soldiers and mercenaries whispered new stories. Tales of human boarding parties that treated impossible odds like professional challenges. Accounts of colonial conflicts settled not through negotiation, but through the simple application of explosives to strategic locations. The galaxy's military. Academies began reluctantly adding new courses to their curricula. Primitive warfare theory and pre-industrial combat applications became required study, though most instructors admitted they had no idea how to teach something so fundamentally uncivilized. But perhaps the most profound change was in how the galaxy understood humanity itself. They weren't just another species struggling to find their place among the stars. They were something far more dangerous and valuable, beings who had never forgotten that sometimes the best solution to a complicated problem was to stop thinking about it and start hitting it with a hammer. Humanity didn't fight wars to win them. They fought wars to end them, using whatever methods actually worked rather than what looked impressive or followed accepted doctrine. And across the galaxy, as news of the Vorthak defeat reached every civilized world, one truth became clear. The universe had just remembered why evolution had once favored simple, direct solutions over complex, elegant ones. The end.